AGRI-5 transformation show seeks to facilitate the growth of African farmers. It also seeks to highlight the lack of transformation that South Africa has not achieved, the democracy approaching 3 decades this year. Further, it will highlight opportunities for SMMEs within the sector, and it will also assist upcoming farmers to convert to commercial farmers. In studio today, we are joined by Advocate Ruan. How are you, sir?
Well, thanks, and hello to you and to all your listeners and all your viewers.
Thank you, sir. Maybe before we start, let me start by congratulating the Competition Commission, yourself and your team. Fantastic report. For me, as an SMME myself, I think it really excited me that there's more opportunities if we can implement what the report seeks to achieve in regards to transformation. So well done.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it is very much a team effort and very much a SME HDP focused inquiry. So very glad to talk about some of the things we uncovered.
Sure. So maybe before you tell us what the Competition Commission does, please tell the viewers who you are and a bit of your background in the sector.
Right, so I've got a legal background, so studied law and then went to practice as a practicing advocate for a couple of years at one of the bar associations. Then joined the Competition Commission in their legal services division, then went over to the investigation division, the enforcement division, where we chase big companies and make sure they're not up to abuses and naughty things. And then this inquiry came along, so I became the technical director, which is essentially the man in charge of making sure the inquiry runs as it should run.
Sure.
And had a team of about 9-10 people under me, and we did all the technical side. So the decision making happens at the top of the commission, but we run the day-to-day operations of the inquiry.
Sure. What does the mandate of the Competition Commission speaks to?
So we essentially have 3 roles to play. And it's in a quick sentence, it's an economic regulator. So it regulates the economy and it regulates competition in the economy. So it's not focused on a particular sector, it focuses on any sector that participates in the economy. So then there's essentially 3 functions. So the first is probably the most well known. That is where we bust cartels. So we investigate cartels, we prosecute cartels. The second function is when it comes to other enforcement. So that would be abuse of dominance. That is essentially big monopoly type firms that are doing things to other firms that compete with them that they ought not be doing. And then finally is the mergers and acquisitions division. So that is when 2 companies merge, and of course we'll speak about Tongaat. That is one of the roles that we play. So when 2 firms want to merge, when one firm wants to acquire the other firm, the competition has to do an assessment about what is the impact on competition, and then we have to say yes or no to that deal. But it's very much competition focused. So that in a very brief nutshell is what the Commission does.
Sure. While I was reading the report, Advocate, you yourself and your team packaged it in themes, and what stood out for me personally, because I'm in the empowering of black farmers, is how the seeds, the chemicals and the fertilizers being extremely exported and how it contributes negatively to the sector. Tell me more about that.
Right, so it was one of the 3 themes that we investigated in this inquiry. So also just quickly, a market inquiry isn't a firm-specific inquiry. So we're not saying we're targeting firm XYZ and we're looking at their specific conduct. We're looking at the sector as a whole, and we're seeing what is problematic, what is distorting competition, what is making it difficult or more difficult, for example, smallholder, emerging and black farmers. And this is one of the themes we considered. Is one of the things that obviously we know affects farmers, particularly emerging and black farmers, is the cost of their inputs. So we had to choose among the many inputs that a farmer has, we had to choose among some of the most important ones. And we looked at fertilizers, we looked at agrochemicals, of course that's pesticides, herbicides, those types of things. And then we looked at seeds. And the main concern was it is what we call a very concentrated market, meaning there are very few firms that have very large market shares, and it means they almost have a disproportionate impact, a disproportionate effect on what happens to their, for example, their customers, which will be farmers in this instance. What we found in this theme is that in the South African economy is very exposed to imports. So we import the majority of our fertilizer. We don't manufacture a lot of fertilizer, At most, what we do is we get the raw ingredients and we mix them up and we package them and we sell them to farmers.
Sure.
But we don't manufacture, we don't make them ourselves. And then on agrochemicals, it's even worse. There we basically import the final product and we import that in bulk. And then seeds is very similar. So seeds is, of course, there are a lot of intellectual properties, breeders of all types of seeds, particularly vegetable seeds. And they're multinational firms. And we import the seeds into this country. We don't develop our own intellectual property. We don't develop our own sort of seeds that we can use for our climate, for our soil conditions. We do none of that. We just import that. And of course, then what happens is when you have global shocks and global events, for example, war in Ukraine and Russia, China again, a huge exporter of fertilizer, saying we are placing a cap on the amount of fertilizer we can export. It affects our farmers. And of course, it affects our smallholder, our emerging and our black farmers disproportionately because they don't have the financial muscle, they don't have the capital to withstand those shocks. So it's one of the findings, and it's not necessarily new or groundbreaking, but it certainly is a confirmation. There's been a lot of discussions about what is the effect, what can South Africa do to insulate ourselves, and this is, I think, what our inquiry uncovered, is to say, well, first of all, we are very exposed to imports because we import that much. Secondly, how difficult it is for our economy, for our government in particular, to try and stimulate new growth in fertilizer and agrochemicals and seeds, because it's so incredibly expensive to set up a fertilizing plant, to develop your intellectual property, a new plantlet or a new variety or whatever it might be. And we'll speak about remedies in a bit, I guess, but one of the things is we need government to really start supporting the industry, to say, look, if there are measures that you can support the existing infrastructure, to build the existing infrastructure, support the existing players, then that absolutely has to be done, because we need to very systematically, and it's going to take a very long time, but very systematically lower our dependence on imports.
Yeah, because the volumes we're talking about are enormous, but that does not mean as a people we then say we are defeated. We have to act, we have to attempt.
Absolutely, and we had that capacity. That's sort of the saddest thing, is we had that capacity in the past, but because of imports, because other nations, other jurisdictions are capable of doing it so much cheaper. And then our local guys, they have to exit because they can't compete. And that's one of the things also we looked at is, that existing capacity we had that's gone away because of imports. And that's maybe one of the things is we want government to consider is, strike a balance between protecting the local industries, which tend to be a bit more expensive because you've got local labor, you've got local distribution, that sort of thing. And making sure that you get the best product, right? Because you want our farmers to have the best product. And there's a need to really strike that balance. And it is a very, very tough balance to strike. There's no doubt about it.
I think just to throw in there my opinion, we need as a country to understand that to compete at a global level, labor is one of the offerings that other countries are offering. And that's how they are successful. So we need to really look into that and see how best we can make all parties to be comfortable.
Absolutely, and of course, apart from fertilizer and seeds and agrochemicals, labor is a huge cost to farmers, and we know it's a huge sector. Even your seasonal workers, it's a huge sector. But labor is incredibly expensive. It's one of the big cost items. But farmers can't, and farming can't do without that labor.
Sure. Then you highlighted 5 fruits and 6 vegetables in the report. Why primarily these 11 commodities?
Yeah, so we had to, again, we knew we were going to undertake some very heavy econometric and economic models, data analysis, very, very technical, very complex. And of course, when you're tracking this data, and we're talking incredible amounts of data, is if you're going to be looking at, the spread of about 100 fruits and vegetables, we would still be sitting here looking at data, trawling through the data reams. It would be exactly, would have been never ending.
Sure.
So we said, instead, let's prioritize. Let's look at, whether out of this list of 100, we can focus on some of them. So the 11 we chose is essentially the top 60 to 70% of what is produced, what is consumed and what is sold.
Gotcha.
So we know we're capturing between 60 and 80% of the entire market when we look at these 11. Makes our lives a little bit easier to say we only have to look at 11 and not 100, but you're still getting the trends because you're capturing 60 to 80% of what happens. You know, when you look at blueberries, for example, or strawberries, or macadamias, or avocados, or those sort of things, it's a tiny, tiny proportion of the market, but you're spending the same amount of time going through the data when you do, for example, potatoes or onions. So definitely the 11 was mostly concerned with data analysis.
Sure.
When we looked at things like imports, at access, where do farmers sell, it was all fruits and vegetables. It's really only particular to the data, to that heavy lifting that the smart people do when they look at the data.
Sure, sure. The retails, what are the findings saying in terms of pricing and transparency that they are giving us, the consumers?
Right, so the retail sector was another big focus of this inquiry. And the reason for that is really because it's so consumer facing. So the thing that any consumer faces almost every day is walking into a retailer, into a store and buying their fresh fruit and vegetables. At least once a week, a lot of people once every day. So it was important for us to consider what is the consumer experience. So it was that aspect, and the second aspect is when farmers try to sell their produce.
Yeah.
So obviously there's the channel where they can sell at the wholesale markets, your municipal fresh produce markets, and then the other option is selling directly into retail. How hard is it for the farmers to enter? So it was looking at from the top and the bottom. So in this particular instance, from the bottom and the consumer facing side, is we discovered, and this is something when we trawled through the data I just mentioned, it's incredibly difficult to compare like for like. The main reason for the consumer is that one retailer decides their consumer base likes a 2 kilogram packet of potatoes or onions or tomatoes or whatever it is. Another retailer says, no, we're not going to sell in 2 kilogram, we're going to sell in 3.5 kilogram. Now, as you as a consumer, you walk in, there's a price difference, and the price difference is normal because the volume, the weight is different. But how do you know between those two products which one is actually cheaper on a like-for-like basis? So what we said to the retailers, and it's essentially the big 6 retailers, that they have to display, in addition to whatever other pricing display they have, their per 3.5 kilogram or whatever it is, they have to also display a pricing per 100 grams on the label.
Got you.
So that you as a consumer can walk into a store and say, all right, so this one is 15 cents per 100 gram. That one is actually 18 cents. That one is 25 cents per 100 gram. I'm not going to buy there. Even though you end up buying your 2.5 kgs or your 1 kg or just your loose and you pack it into your plastic bag yourself, you know that you are paying the cheapest. And the reason for that is, of course, we want to stimulate competition. We want the retailers to make sure that they are competing aggressively for consumers. And if consumers are better able to exercise that choice to say, okay, I'm going to go where it's the cheapest, because nowadays, of course, we removed exclusivity in shopping centers. So, and this was previous work that the Commission did, is in the past you would have one retailer and it would be the only retailer in that entire shopping center. So and it was contractual agreement. So we said, no, that's not allowed. Nowadays, and it's becoming particularly in your urban areas and your cities and large towns, you get a shopping center where you would have 2 to 3, even 4 of the competing retailers. So it's literally the difference between walking from one retailer across the aisle to the next retailer. And of course, when you can compare on a like-for-like basis, it empowers you as a consumer to make the best choice, to make sure that you can buy what fits your pocket the best.
So before I go to my next question, let's remain at the agreements that retail stores enjoy with these properties. We spoke about offset that there are more opportunities now coming whereby people can open up their own stores and sell the produce directly to the...
Absolutely. So part of this engagement that we want is we said we want retailers to compete more aggressively. It's almost a sense that we're getting that they're too comfortable. Of course, they would tell you any time of the day that they are competing very aggressively and it's dog eats dog. But what we are seeing as the regulator, as the one that stands on the outside and is looking into these retailers, looking into how they do their businesses, pricing, that sort of thing, is what we are noting is really that they are too comfortable You don't want people being too comfortable in competition because it means competition isn't working.
Yeah.
So what we obviously saw with one of the retailers, and it was Food Lovers Market, they used to be fruit and veg. They were a challenger retailer a decade or so ago. And they said, okay, we have this model where we are going to procure our fresh produce directly from the municipal markets because it's a lot cheaper.
Yes.
What happened in the last about 10, 15 years is they had to adopt the same model as the other formal retailers. And that, what we mean with that is that they had to adopt a very, very expensive but sophisticated supply chain. So this is part of what we investigated is all these retailers have, of course, we know the distribution centers.
Yeah.
You drive on a highway, you have these massive warehouses that belong to these retailers. Now they are incredibly sophisticated. I'm saying, you know, the trucks get sealed into the wall.
Sure.
So you don't lose the temperature from when you unload, right? And when you don't break the cold chain, your fresh produce lasts longer. You have tracking devices on the trucks. You know, you have teams of people with computers on their arms that are checking what goes where. It's very sophisticated and it's very nice for them because they state of the art
precision.
Precision.
Yeah.
But what we are saying, it comes at a huge cost. So what we compared is what the retailers are paying to farmers and the price that you face as a consumer. So what we saw is, because of course our concern was that the retailers are, or what we call profiteering, that they're making too much profits when they're selling to you as a consumer. So what we found in most instances is insufficient evidence to support profiteering. So what we see is high markup, so the price difference between what they pay the farmer and what you pay as a consumer, is that markup is quite high. They tried to explain to us to say the reason for that is because they have all these costs. And that's what we also verified, is because they have this very sophisticated, very expensive supply chain, you as a consumer end up paying for that. You pay up more than what you actually need to if they hadn't had to fund this massively expensive supply chain. Retailers are saying, well, that's what our consumers want. We are saying that's fine. What consumers also want is cheaper pricing.
Correct.
Particularly essential foods like fresh produce. It's something that's on your dinner table every single night of the week.
Correct.
Is your fresh produce, fruit and veggies. So they want it cheaper, and particularly our poorer communities, they need cheaper. And whether it's your entry-level retailer, it's exactly the same distribution model. It doesn't matter. It's just the store branding that's changing, but the same costs go back to all the stores. So then what we said is, okay, we need to start thinking a little bit differently about how competition takes place amongst the formal retailers. Our idea is, and what we are trying to foster and trying to promote, is the entry into shopping centers, specifically shopping centers. There's no use it being somewhere else because the consumer isn't necessarily going to drive, 2-3 kilometers down the road. It has to be in the same shopping center. To introduce what we refer to as almost like the green grocer model. It's a model that used to exist 20, 30, 40 years ago. And then, these guys exited because the retailers were too aggressive. When they started selling fresh produce, these guys had to close down. What we're saying is this market has evolved to a point where your retailers now have this incredibly expensive distribution model. They can't lower their prices because then they're not going to recoup their cost. Instead, what we are seeing is if you can enter as a SME, as a small business, or even as a medium business into a shopping center, and you can get your supply from your fresh produce market, which, by the way, is the same or even better quality than you get at your retail stores. This idea that it's worse quality, it's the leftovers, completely incorrect. If you're a smart buyer, you're a smart green grocer, and you know where to look and where to go, you can find fresher, better looking produce than you get at the retailers. Again, because it doesn't have to go this long route through trucks and distribution center and another truck and then a refrigerator and then another refrigerator and so on. You can get it from the fresh produce market to your store shelves within a day or two. So it's still fresh. It was harvested a day or two ago. And now the benefit is you don't have this massive cost that you need to recoup because your supply chain is a lot shorter. Your pricing can be a lot cheaper. So what you would have as a consumer is you would have the green grocer next door to a retailer. The consumer would walk in, buy their fresh, nice-looking fruit and veg, and then walk over and do the rest of their groceries next door. And that's the model we want to facilitate. So we're working with the South African Property Owners Association.
Yes.
They are the association that brings together all the property owners that own the malls, because they obviously, that's who you enter into a lease agreement with if you want a store. You don't enter into your competitor, which is the retailer. So, and then we have some of the largest property owners, particularly in strategic areas, and there's about 9 of them that we've identified in this inquiry, to say you have to work with small and emerging businesses.
Fantastic.
To make sure that when they come knocking at your door, that you try your best to facilitate them. We wanted to actually consider things like minimum floor space allocation.
Yes.
But the unintended consequences would have been too worse. And of course, the property sector is still struggling a bit after COVID. It's only now that we're seeing recovery of that, but it's still a very delicate balance. You don't want to bring in these guys, you upset the balance, and then next moment your mall closes.
Yes.
And then it's bad business for everyone.
We don't want that.
Yes. Yeah. So it's striking that balance between, helping the small businesses, the medium-sized businesses that want to enter. And there's a number, the DTIC has got an obligation here to make sure that there's funding available, that we assist these type of businesses that want to enter. Yeah. It's one of the remedies we employed. We've had discussions with the DTIC to make it easier for this to happen. And again, the principle is simple. The principle is, if we can introduce stronger competition, particularly for fruit and veg, but really it goes anything that the retailers sell, but our focus is fruit and veg, then the pricing eventually will lower for the consumers, because we're not going to get there if we attack the retailers one by one. We saw that with their pricing. It just gets so complicated, it gets so dispute-ridden that we'll be stuck in litigation, we'll be stuck in court processes for the next 10 to 15 years. If we walk up to a retailer and we say, your price is too expensive, lower that by 10 or 20%. And of course, the unintended consequences. If they do that for fresh produce, they might just raise the price on some of the other produce. Consumer is going to face the brunt of that. So we need to think a little bit differently, and I think that's what we try to do with this initiative.
Sure. So I'm going to put together black farmers specifically. With my experience, 15 years working with black farmers, there's always been a challenge of access to markets. Agencies on the floor at the fresh produce markets, predominantly being white, male-owned. What is the report suggesting to change this demographics in terms of the agency ownerships, and how easy is it going to be for black farmers to access markets?
Very, very important focus of this inquiry was access to markets for black farmers, for emerging farmers. And of course, they have essentially 2 routes to market. The one is the in brackets wholesale markets, your municipal fresh produce markets. That is big, that is bulk, that is volume. So if you have the volume, if you have the bulk, but it's not necessarily bulk. You can literally take your bucky there with your load and sell it at a fresh produce municipal fresh produce market. The other is into the retail. So the focus on the market agents is obviously on the municipal fresh markets. They are the intermediary between the farmer selling the produce and the buyer, who can be a greengrocer, it can be a representative for a hospital, for a feeding scheme, for whatever it is. They're the buyers. They're the ones who need the fresh produce. The market agent acts as the intermediary. He sits with most of the knowledge about pricing, about volumes, about demand, about supply, those sort of things. They play an incredibly crucial role when it comes to price discovery, to price setting, to essentially market access for any farmer when they sell their produce at a fresh produce market. Of course, what we found is that there is very, very limited number of black farmers selling into the fresh produce markets, the municipal markets. And of course, it was very interesting for us to find out why. One of the reasons was that they're saying, well, I don't have a relationship with a market agent. And again, the market agents, very comfortable dealing business only with the commercial farmers, the big white-owned commercial farmers, huge volumes coming through. They're not really interested in building new relationships and getting to know this. So we have a group of remedies that are aimed at this. The other thing is, if you look at the market agents themselves, is that, as you mentioned, very untransformed. And when we say untransformed, 2 of the biggest ones are owned by a black investment firm, but that's really where the transformation stop is, in shareholding. So you've got a black company owning shares, and that's it. But on the floor, don't see black salespeople, you don't see black farmers, you don't see black traders
Yes.
doing deals. It's really just, all white faces, all the traditional relationships existing as they've existed for the past 30 years. Very little change, very little transformation on the ground level. Really where it matters we think where it matters for black farmers the most. They want to see someone they know, someone that speaks their language, someone that they can build a relationship with, and there are very few of those black market agents on the trading floors. Already there are initiatives, the markets themselves are giving them prime real estate, they're giving them the best floor space.
Fantastic.
But then the floor space is empty. There's not enough produce because they don't have enough farmers bringing in their produce to those agents. So we have a number of remedies, a number of solutions to this. Number one is we said when it comes to this black shareholder that owns two of the largest market agency, they have to divest in the one because these two aren't competing as they need to. Got this very comfortable shareholder, common shareholder sitting at the top, and these two aren't competing. So you need to get rid of one of them. And hopefully then we'll see better competition. You'll have one taking market share from the other. The other thing is we need to see more transformation when it comes to the black market agents themselves. So they need opportunities. And the other interesting thing what we discovered is all of the salespeople, the actual agents that are doing the deals, making the deals, they would tell you that we have exceptional black salespeople on the floors. Guys that are incredibly savvy, that can cut a deal like no one else on that floor. We said, that's fantastic. Now our question was, if they are so good and they are so well, what is preventing them from taking that next step and opening up their own agency, their own business? And the answer we found is, well, it's a skills problem. Because it's one thing that you can make deals and you can sell produce. It's another if you have to run a business. Now you've got salaries to pay, you've got contracts to enter into, you've got budgets and bookkeeping and accounting.
Of the unknown.
Absolutely. You've got planning, you've got marketing. Those are the sort of business skills that are lacking. They don't lack any skills when it comes to making deals and selling fresh produce, but they don't necessarily know how to run a business. So some of them try, and unfortunately they fail and they exit within a year. So what we've now said is for the next 6 years, the large market agents that have those skills and have developed and honed and refined those skills for the last 30 years, they have to actually enter into agreements, almost training agreements on how to manage a market agency, have those skills transfer. These are sort of, at a minimum, that has to last, these agreements have to last for 2 years. So it's not just 1 or 2 training sessions, we call it a day, and you're left on your own. It's literally for 2 years they have to work with these black market agencies.
KPIs.
Absolutely. Enter into a solid agreement, so it's not just an informal, I'll come show you, walk around with me, and tomorrow you're on your own. It's a formal agreement for a period of 6 years at a minimum. So the length of the program is about 6 years, longer if we have our say. But at a minimum per large agent and HDP agent, it's a minimum of 2 years. And they have to transfer these skills so that when these exceptional salespeople, when they start their business, they don't have to exit. And of course, then there are also initiatives from the market authorities themselves, that's the municipal markets themselves. They have to pay more attention to their programs. There's advocacy programs where they have to make sure they educate the black farmers. So the black farmers bring in the produce. The Department of Agriculture has a role to play there to make sure that black farmers know, look, this is what it entails. You know, you've done all this work, all this money that you've spent getting to this point of harvest. Now what do? You can't lose money. You need to get the best price. And often they would get a good price at the municipal markets. But what about transport? What about volumes? What about packaging and marketing and that sort of thing? So there's also that knowledge gap. And we want the department, we want their sector regulator over market agents called the Agricultural Produce Agents Council. We want them to also have a role to make sure that they also educate, they advocate for black farmers, they make sure that black farmers and black agents get connected. So a lot of different players, everyone has their role to play. One single person isn't going to make a difference. Together, we hope to see that difference. The Commission is going to remain involved. It's not like we've done this inquiry and we're walking away. At least for the next 5 years, very active involvement. But of course, we stay with our work for as long as it needs to be. And the more change we see, the more reason there is for us to stay involved.
Fantastic. And moving to my last question, the report highlights 31 remedies. Which of these 31 is binding Which of these 31 remedies are non-binding?
Yeah.
And lastly, are there time frames to each of these remedies?
Yeah.
I feel look, I'm excited about your report. I congratulated you, but I want to see results.
Yes. And that's absolutely, that perhaps is the starting point,
Yeah.
is immediate results.
Yeah.
So for example, some of these results we're already seeing. There are retailers that have implemented the price transparency. So you can go to your retailer and go look at these 11 fresh produce on the tab and see if that per 100 gram pricing is there. If it's not, you come and tell us. We'll make sure we speak to them.
Sure.
Then we also have agreements with, for example, Simba. We haven't spoken much about that.
Yeah.
That they're bringing in one of their older varieties and making it available to the Agricultural Research Council free of charge for any farmer to say this is a tried and tested variety. It's been working in our conditions, in our soil conditions,
Sure.
for the last 20, almost 25 years. Now you can get access to that variety, particularly for processing purposes. We know it's a good chip variety. It makes good crisps.
Yeah.
So it's available. Those things have already been implemented. They're already
Fantastic.
happening. A lot of the others are between 12 and 18 months. That's the sort of first time frames that they have to be implemented, and for a duration of between 5 and 6 years. So that's, of those 31 remedies, some already implemented, some have to be implemented within 12 to 18 months, and they have to last for about 5 years.
Okay.
So that's when we talk time frames. Then non-binding and binding. So there we use the word recommendations.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a principle of government. It's a principle of the separation of powers that we as a sector regulator can't tell the government what to do. Only Parliament, through acts of Parliament, can tell the government what to do. So we
Sure.
can't make binding orders to government and tell them, even though maybe some would say that is the way to go. you know what should be done.
Sure.
Now the government must just do it. But that's unfortunately not how government works, and that's not how democracy works. So it has to go through a parliamentary process. So all our recommendations when it comes to government, and there's the Department of Agriculture,
Yeah.
Department of Trade and Industry, and Department of Water and Sanitation, our report has to go to Parliament.
Yeah.
And it has to be tabled in Parliament, and then it has to be discussed by the different portfolio committees. It has to be debated.
Correct.
So what happens, the effect of that is it becomes part of the policy-making debate. So when the parliamentarians, the members of Parliament sit, when they decide on what are we going to put into the next act, how are we going to amend the existing legislation, now you have our act telling them this is what needs to be done. We need more work here. We need more work here. This act isn't working the way it should be. This needs to be changed. So all the recommendations to government essentially are non-binding, but it's not necessarily as simple as that. It's still binding in the sense that it goes to Parliament, that it has to go to Parliament and become part of policy formation, policy creation. That unfortunately is a more longer term. And that again is just how governments and democracy works. You don't make an act overnight.
Yeah.
You upset the balance. You can create more harm than good. So there is a very long process. Luckily, some of the most critical legislation, particularly to the market agents, is already in the process of amendments.
Yeah.
And we are attaching our recommendations to that process to see how many of our recommendations we can attach to the existing process. We don't have to start from scratch.
Yes.
There are bills that have served in Parliament. We can add some of our work into those bills. So hopefully then in the next 3 to 5 years, we can see some of those policy debates actually become law, become Parliament. Then the second option is remedial actions.
Yep.
So the Commission has powers in terms of our Act to bind private firms. So we have the powers to tell a private firm that you have to do this.
Okay.
So when it comes to the retailers, pricing transparency, that sort of thing, it's binding. They
Yes.
have to. They don't have a choice. If they don't agree, then we must go take us to court, and then we fight it out in court,
Yeah.
which obviously we do that a lot, and we're ready for that if that comes to play. Obviously, for the consumer, it's
Yeah.
better that doesn't happen,
Yeah.
that we get these implemented as soon as possible. So the other thing on the market agencies, these agreements we've spoken about,
Yes.
they are binding. They don't
Yes.
have a choice. Either you do it or you challenge us in court, and then we defend in court. But already, our discussions in the market agents is some of them are saying, okay, we think this is a good idea. In fact, the idea comes from the market agents themselves. There
Sure.
was one of the largest market agents, had this with a black agency, transferred those skills. This black agency did so well that he was able to buy a smaller agency, right? So that's growth, that's
Yes.
participation, that's where we want to see. So we said, okay, we're going to take that idea, now make it mandatory, roll it out across the board, because we know it's tried and tested, it works.
Sure.
So, but those are binding. They don't have a choice there.
Clear.
And then some of the remedies, again, we haven't spoken too much about that, but there's remedies on the seed suppliers. So 2 of the largest seed suppliers in the country, they have to have a development, set up a development fund, contribute. It's about 700 farmers that they have to target in their supply development. When it comes to their new varieties, use those 700 farmers. 700 small farmers. About 60% of that 700 has to be black farmers. So that is binding as well. They have to follow that program. And we've been in discussions with them. They're very happy to do that. It's part of the role that they can play. So some are binding. Usually anything on a private firm is binding.
Correct.
If we want it to be binding, and in this instance, the ones I just mentioned are binding. These guys don't have a choice. They have to implement.
Great work. I think now that you've highlighted our timelines and binding and non-binding, I can fairly say you have done with your team a great job so far. And how does the viewer get a hold of the Competition Commission? Are they able to lodge complaints?
Yes.
Or
absolutely.
How do you operate?
We absolutely welcome that. I mean, we're a regulator, about 300 staff. We can't monitor every single thing that happens everywhere else. So we rely on consumers. And we're also it's very easy for consumers. I mean, there's a WhatsApp line, there's emails, you can pick up the phone, it's all on the website. You could lodge a complaint, the explanations are there. It's actually very easy for consumers to enact with us. As I said, I'm full-time on this and I'm going to remain on this. So I'll be the contact points through some of these channels, these various channels, even on Twitter and Facebook. We even monitor what happens those. If you leave a comment there, we can always follow up. So lots of channels, and we definitely encourage any consumer, any viewer to be our eyes and ears, essentially, to make sure that what we talk about, what we see, they see that change. Even farmers, if they know things must happen and they don't see that happen, come into contact with the Commission. We'll definitely follow up.
Please confirm for the viewers your website address.
So it's www.compcom.co.za, compcom.co.za.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. I really hope that Advocate Ruan in the future can give us some more time to just break down those chapters and those themes. I think this was just an introduction to the work they have done. If you go on their website, the report is there. It's got depth. You can read about it. So we hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.